yeah, might as well give folks a chance to sign in.
I missed. Do you want us muted when we're not talking?
You don't need to be unless there's ambient noise. Your panelists, I want you to be able to jump in when you have something to add.
Okay.
Folks, if you're just joining us, I would love to have you put where you're tuning in from in the chat. I'd love to see all these attendees from all over the country and beyond. If you are in a time zone or other idiom where you can be drinking right now, I'd love to know what Willamette Valley wine is in your glass. And we'll get started in just a moment.
Are there certain time zones where that's sanctioned versus others? What's our cutoff?
I mean, I think the East Coast, it's like 8 a.m. I haven't lived on the West Coast long enough to feel like it's my place to say. All right, we got a bunch of folks here. Let's get started. Welcome to preview week for Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. The 2019 Willamette Valley wines featured in this tasting series are exclusive small lot bottlings for our wine trade auction. If you don't know about the auction and you want to learn about how to purchase these wines, contact Emily at the WVWA, and I'll put her email address in the chat. I would love to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for their ongoing support. And a big thank you to our imperial sponsor, Winebow. And with that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Representing Lot 1, Bryan Irvine of Hyland Estates. Representing Lot 2, Peter Shea of Shea Wine Cellars. Representing Lot 3, Drew Voit of Harper Voit. Representing Lot number 5, Bryan Weil of Rain Dance. And representing Lot number 6, Tracy Kendall of Nicolas-Jay. And now I'll kick it off to our moderator, the esteemed Ian Burch of Archery Summit. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. We look forward to seeing you in person on August 5th, if you're ever able to make it out. We're very excited to see people and have people attend, unlike last year where it was strictly virtual. And we're very excited for you to join us today. Hopefully we have some wines to follow along with. And we can't thank you enough for all of your support for this auction. This auction helps the Willamette Valley Wineries Association kind of tell the world who we are. It enables us to hire full-time staff. And when we're having issues with COVID or there's any problems with legislation, we have a plethora of communication and tools to help us navigate through difficult times. So your support right now is tremendous. Today, I have the opportunity to moderate this group of talented, seasoned, and thoughtful winemakers. I love Willamette Valley Pinot, and everybody that is tuning in today obviously does too. So I would like to go through each one of these auction lots, and I'm going to have each individual here just sort of let us know what you made, who you are, what your winery is about, and let's see what you got. And I'm going to start with Tracy Kendall here with Nicolas-Jay, lot number 6. Tracy, can you let us know what your auction lot's all about?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. We this year have Block 1 Old Vine Pommard Clone is the name of our lot. It's a barrel select that comes from our state vineyard, Bishop Creek, which is out in the beautiful Yamhill Carlton. It's a secluded 33-acre site, all own-rooted Old Vine Pommard and Badensville, pretty much. It's planted on that ancient marine sediment soil, so soils that really allow the vines to dig deep and look for water. Tends to build a wine that's quite structured, a lot of dark fruit, a lot of minerality, and a lot of power. We make a single vineyard from this bottling. We also make an own rooted blend from this bottling, but this is really the very best barrel from that Old Vine block. It was a gorgeous vintage. I think a vineyard like Bishop Creek does really well in a little bit cooler vintages because it tends to be a little bit bigger wine, a little bit more powerful. kind of softens it out a little bit. And the elegance and sort of beauty of the wines this year, I think, are gorgeous. So excited to share it with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm curious, Tracy, how does this barrel kind of distinguish itself like differently from the rest of the wines you make?
When we're looking for our best barrels, for us, it tends to be less about specific flavors. You know, people talk a lot about, well, this has a lot of cherry or this has a lot of minerality. For us, it's about mouthfeel, power, and tension, right? So when you put that wine in your mouth, it's going to have an incredibly long life, a long palate, a lot of good weight and density and sort of power to the wine. Because for me, those flavors are going to continue to evolve, right? You may get a lot of minerality and dark fruit one day, and 5 years from now, that's going to develop into more sort of mushroom, earth, right? Those different components. And so we're really looking for a barrel that stands out for its depth and its power.
Wonderful. No, it sounds delicious. Thank you. I'm excited to try it. So now we're going to go to Mr. Bryan Irvine. We've got lot number 1 from Hyland Estates. Bryan, I'd love to hear about your auction lot.
Well, it's always good to be number 1, right, Ian? I mean, you know, you're nowhere to go, right? So our auction lot this year is called Corey in the Jory. So Corey named after Charles Corey, who the clone is named after, and Jory being the beautiful volcanic soil we have up at Hyland. So we selected, it's a blend of 4 different blocks. 3 of our original blocks are the original planting from Hyland, and one that was planted a little bit later, but all Corey clone. You know, the original plantings being in 1971 up, you know, at the high elevation site outside McMinnville, the McMinnville AVA. And, you know, when we're looking for the best wine we can from Hyland, the old blocks, they always shine. The complexity and the depth that we get from these original plantings, always, you know, they stand alone when we get in the cellar. We love them. There's a silkiness, a texture, and just a real balance that these vines, they just tend to find every year. 2019 being no exception, being a cooler year. And, you know, we were harvested early October. Just ton of complexity, ton of balance, and just real classic Hyland.
Fantastic. Bryan, would you consider this vintage a little bit more, you know, like ethereal or opulent? Are you thinking this is a little bit more of an Oregonian vintage, or how would you characterize 2019 in general?
Yeah, people always use the term classic vintage, and I think that's a good term for this one. It's definitely more, you know, not on the opulent side. Hyland being a cool site in a cool-ish vintage. I think it's a real throwback to some of the earlier vintages. We have beautiful acidity, beautiful balance, you know, lower alcohols, which is, I think, as I say, you ask most winemakers in Oregon, that's why we're here. We're here to make these beautiful acid-driven, pure, balanced wines. And I think 19 is a great example of that.
Lovely. I couldn't agree more. It's the reason why I moved to the Willamette. It's a beautiful vintage indeed.
We wanted a cool climate, and that's why we're here, you know, so.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, Peter Shea with Shea Wine Cellars. We've got lot number 2. Peter, would you like to tell us about your lot?
Yeah, so our lot is called 2 blocks, and it comes from 2 different specific areas of our vineyard that represent 2 sort of classic clones for Oregon, Pommard clone and Wadensville clone. It's with all our releases that we do with wine, it's always just like specific spots in the vineyard, trying to highlight that. And so in this case, it's really us putting together a little bit more of a barrel blend, something where we're trying to, you know, combine different things and really have a little more intent there in what we're doing. And so together, those 2 clones, you know, the Wadensville is bringing a little bit more earthy and spicy kind of character, and then the Pommard is just this really incredibly beautiful, you know, a little bit more fruit forward kind of clone in this case. And 2 really opposite ends of the vineyard for us. One's much more east facing, one's much more west facing. So really bringing a lot of different components together to make this blend.
Wonderful. I hear clones coming up here. I've heard it a few times. Peter, in general, I mean, do you tend to favor one clone over another, or are you more into kind of like having a diversity of clones?
I think a diversity is really important there, because they all bring something different to the table. And, certainly, like I was saying there, each clone has really got its own set of characteristics that it can definitely display itself differently depending on the spot in the vineyard, and the individual characteristics of a block. But at the same time, there's some commonality block to block between certain clones, and so they're all really important blending components to us. We have 5 different clones in our vineyard, and they each, for different releases, they all bring something important to that.
Hey, wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you, Peter. All right. Well, the next slot here, we've got Mr. Drew Voit from Harper Voit, lot number 3. Drew, take it away, bud.
Okay, so our 2019 auction lot is, we call it Running Up That Hill. It's I'm old enough, so some people won't know it. It's a Kate Bush song that I really like, and it is high up on a hill on the eastern side of the Yosemite Hills. The vineyard is called Beezy Vineyard. It's directly above a vineyard that Ian's quite familiar with, Seven Springs, and it really is contiguous with the upper portion of that. So when that vineyard was being planted back in 2008, 2009, I was launching my label. I jumped at the chance to contract that. So we work with 3 different clones on the site, and this comes from one particular part that is a really interesting heirloom selection. It goes by a variety of names. The backstory appears to be something that the Druin family brought with them when they started DDO. So some people call it 2AA, and it's got some few other names, but it's very interesting. It has a lot of intensity, and is a fairly early ripening clone, which suits that cooler site. And then we did about 25% whole cluster there, which we often do ranges of whole cluster with this selection, because the opulence of the wine really can be balanced out with the structure from partial whole cluster fermentation.
Fantastic. I'm curious too, Drew, do you change the amount of whole cluster inclusion in your wine depending on the vintage?
I do, yeah. I think for me, I know there's a range of opinions that quite a few winemakers can come up with. It can be quite a disagreement at a party talking about the role of whole cluster. But I find that I'm looking for certain characteristics in the stems, visually, aromatically, and even in terms of chewing on the stems, which you can easily find me doing routinely, not only in the vineyard, but especially when we bring fruit in. So I'm looking for certain aromatics and characteristics, and then with different clones in different years, it's a whole cluster is a tensioning agent. Allows you to tighten up the structure of wines if you want to increase and change the kind of the shape of them. So it's very on the fly.
Wonderful. Do you like whole cluster to be perceivable, or do you like to kind of balance it into the wine so that the consumer doesn't really have a sense that it's there?
Yeah, that's my idea with it. I mean, I do a lot of consulting and custom winemaking, and I have clients that really like those very high whole cluster marked styles, which I think are fascinating. But and we do those. But for Harper Voit, I'm really looking for something that is a structural support in the same way we would change our fermentation management and cap management, as well as wood choices. That it's supposed to be. Ideally, you don't notice it, but the wine has something that adds a dimension.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. All right. Well, last and very, very not least, we've got Bryan Weil from Rain Dance Vineyard. We got lot number 5. Bryan, can you let us know what your lot's all about?
Yeah, so I'm excited to be here and hopefully, have a great event this year in kind of person. And so very exciting for this year. But so I'm Bryan. I actually make the wines here at Alexana, which is where I'm at. But I do have the fortune to make the wines for the Austins for Rain Dance for the last decade almost. So it's been a great relationship working with them. They started with 6 acres of grapes and now have over 70 up in the Shea Mountains. So it's a really great relationship between the grower and a winery, whereas most of their fruit goes into our Willamette Valley program. But I'm able to kind of cherry pick off the top 10 or so percent and make them some nice wines for their tasting over there in the Shea Mountains. So a great relationship. And the Austins have a lot of history. They're actually 7th generation here in the Shea Mountains. And so they really are a lot about kind of preservation and restoration. So it's been fun to watch over the last 10 years to kind of see them expand their vineyard plantings and really grow these things from basically this bare land and restore it and preserve it for many generations to come. So their auction lot is actually called the Austin Healey. They're avid car collectors. They love Mustangs. They have multiple Mustangs, but their second car actually was an Austin Healey from a family member who they got. And it was actually just in parts and pieces. So I think it's a pretty interesting comparison to kind of growing these vineyards and building them up. So they built that basically from scratch, from parts, into this beautiful, sleek Austin Healey, a 1960 Austin Healey. So if you look on their Instagram, they're showing some pictures of it, getting up ready for preview week. So you can see a picture of that beautiful car. But they just love everything about it. It's sleek, it's sexy. And I think that just talks a lot about the 2019 vintage and the wine. So what we did is we pulled from the original 6 acres up there, high elevation, 800-foot plus elevation in the Shea Mountains, their original estate vineyard there. And it's 3 different clones. So I like to blend a lot of different clones. I know you guys have talked a little bit about that. So this one is predominantly Pommard, about half of it's Pommard. And then 2 other barrels we pulled from some 115 and 667. On this one, it is fully destemmed, and we age it in pretty minimal new oak. But for this one, it's fun to pull a few gallons out of each barrel, have my employees put it in a keg and barrel it down for you guys to, or bottle it for you guys to enjoy. So to me, I think you've heard a lot about the 2019 vintage, but super elegant, sleek, that sexy, lovely tannins, the lower moderate alcohols, really good acidity. I think that's the reason we called it the Austin Healey.
Wonderful. And Bryan, from year to year, do you like to change what you offer for the wine auction? Do you kind of see it coming before the harvest starts, or is it something that you kind of will take note of and evolve as it goes through élevage?
Yeah, it's a combination for sure. I definitely like the pedigree of certain blocks, maybe some of the older vines, maybe certain rootstocks or whatever it may be. But to me, you have an idea going into harvest, and that always changes. And so we watch these wines, we monitor them. Every vintage is different. What I look for this auction lot is to show off that vintage and try to minimize the winemaker hand, so you can really see, so not too much new oak, really minimize tanks that maybe have more whole cluster or bigger, extraction in terms of fermentation. So to me, I kind of watch it and pull from barrels that I think really show off the vintage. And also make a really nice wine together. So it's constant evolution, and constantly tasting these like the other winemakers do weekly, and monthly is kind of how we watch it until we make the final decision when it comes to bottling time.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to try all of your wines. And you're all winemakers. I was talking to Julie about this earlier. It's like I can ask winemaking questions because I know a lot of them. The things that make me think and make me squirm. But I'm always so curious. Harvest usually starts for me when Josh Bergstrom posts on social media that he's picked somewhere, and it's like, oh man, it's oh yeah, okay, it's starting. And then we pick eventually, and there's a lot that goes into it. We all know, making sure that you've got the right staff, that all the tanks are clean, interns are actually showing up and who they said they were. But there's always that moment where it's like everything's sort of buzzing around you. It's chaotic, but for me, I find calm right after I get a few tanks fermenting. It's like the ship is moved into port, I just have to park it, like everything's functioning well. And I feel like it can kind of relax, even though it's still insane. And I'm just trying to figure out where each one of your sort of like Zen, sort of happy, calm places is during harvest.
On the forklift.
Oh, nice. Just doing donuts or just
pretty much running away from the interns, and so they can't hear me when I'm driving it. So forklift.
Out in the vineyard's nice for that too. You get a little solitude. Just go out and do some sampling. You can kind of reset.
Totally, where all the magic starts.
I feel like all the fruit schedule. Like once we've scheduled all the picks, they're on the calendar, and I know it's happening. Then I can feel good. All the fruit doesn't have to be in, but I need to have everything on the calendar before I can take that big deep breath. especially in Oregon, right? It's the thing that we love about Oregon is that it's challenging and we're right on the cusp of that cool climate. It's a little bit hard to get all the fruit in, right? We have years like 19 where we get some weather that comes in that I think ultimately makes the wine that much more complex and that much more interesting. But, you know, it's not a given, right? I think there are other climates where it's just a given. Harvest happens, you bring the fruit in, it is what it is, you pick when you want. And Oregon's not like that. So until I know it's all coming in safely, I don't sleep that well.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. There's more to contend with. There's more layers. There's more factors. You know, we're not making like the same wine that we did last year and that we'll make next year. It's I think it's a really good point. Peter, Bryan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, that's on the vintage, you know, the vintage to vintage variation. I think that's really what makes Oregon unique and special is, you know, how each vintage is really different, whether it's a warmer year, a cooler year, a little bit of rain. But going back to harvest, I get happy when all that energy and all that buzz is happening and people are flying around on forklifts and, you know, you got processing and pressing and you're barreling. I mean, whether it's the calm, whatever it is, but I love the energy of harvest. And, you know, harvest is about the harvest and the grapes, also about the people and the meals together and, you know, tasting the wines as they progress. I just love the energy of harvest. I think that's what is just engaging and keeps me coming back. And what gets, you know, yeah, you're working 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, but you're never tired because you're just up and you're going. And that's the fun part about making wine and why we're also lucky to do it for a living. It's, you know, I love it.
Right. Yeah, for
I
sure.
think for me, it's once the fruit is in, and I think part of that's probably because the big focus for us is, you know, we grow for 80% of the fruit that we grow is going to other people. So there's a responsibility there to to get them fruit, and that until that's picked, it's that's what I'm thinking about. So once that's done, it's like, okay, now we can focus on, you know, what we want to do and making wine ourselves. So it's like there's a deep breath that, you know, exhale once that last truck pulls off the vineyard and you see it drive away. It's like, that's not my responsibility anymore. It's someone else's problem. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and, you know, I think harvest is definitely different for everybody. And I think, you know, it's so much fun sculpting these wines and putting them together. And yeah, something I want to go back to that Drew kind of pointed out was whole cluster. I'm curious to see if any of you guys use whole cluster in general, or if you use it on your lot, and kind of like what you think about it as a tool in winemaking.
I'll jump. We did not do any whole cluster in our 19. We do like whole cluster with certain blocks, certain clones, and in certain vintages. So we use it as, yeah, I think, you know, as a blending component. I love it when there's a little bit of spice, a little bit of that beautiful aromatic. But we don't do it in every year. It's looking at the fruit, not making the decision based off of, you know, years past, but looking at the fruit, see it when it shows up, chew on the stems, look at the stems, you know, taste it, and then make the decision if we think we'd like to do a little bit on, you know, on this lot or that lot.
Right. How about you other winemakers?
We don't do any whole cluster. We've played a little bit with stems added back, where we actually destem the fruit and then put some stems in for some of that stem tannin. But I would say 99% of the time we're all destemmed. I like whole cluster wines. I think there's so many beautiful examples in the Valley, and it lends such an interesting component. But for me as a winemaker, what I want to deliver is a wine that's incredibly reflective of place and vintage. And I feel like whole cluster is a winemaking tool that basically imposes something a bit on the wine, right? As Drew said, we can talk about this all day, but for me, it's showing you my hand versus what the vineyard's giving you. And so Jean-Nicolas and I collaborate on that all the time and feel similarly. And we're also making wine in the style of Méo-Camazé, right, in France. And Jean-Nicolas learned from Henri Jaillet, who never did any whole cluster. And so we've carried on that tradition here in Oregon with that same mindset of really showcasing what the vineyard can do versus what we can do.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally understand that approach. It's funny. I've talked to many winemakers about this exhaustively, you know, And I've even heard some winemakers say that whole cluster, the actual rachis tastes different in each site, and you're actually tasting, what each site gives. So if you have whole cluster kind of as I'd say an equal or a common denominator amongst each wine, you would taste an expression of that. I always think that's interesting. And it's funny because making wine with Dominic Lafon, he always disliked whole cluster, and his December broke one year, and he decided he still needed to make wine, so he ended up making a lot of whole cluster. It was just really interesting to see somebody like yourself, Tracy, who has worked with a veteran Burgundian for years, who just didn't necessarily like the style, but was kind of forced into it. It's just funny, like listening to people's different takes on it. And
Jean,
Bryan, excuse me. Yeah.
I think Jean-Nicolas would make me hand to stem all the clusters.
Oh, geez. You're like, yep, I'm never coming home again. I'm going to be at the winery for the rest of my life.
Harvest.
Gentle. Bryan, are you a big whole cluster guy?
So I think it's very site and vintage dependent. On our Dundee Hills estate, and then with the rain dance to Hale Mountain fruit, I don't feel it benefits the wine. So every year I do a couple fermenters from here and one or so from the estate for rain dance. And I just find the tannins don't play well together, the fruit tannin and then the stem tannin. I find it to kind of counteract each other almost in a bad way. So, but I do work with sites around the valley that I do think really benefit from whole clusters. So we don't get a lot of that fruit. So in general, 97% of our fruit is destemmed here. And in this blend, it did not see any whole clusters. So to me, I'm very similar to Tracy and kind of their thought. But yeah, very site and vintage dependent.
Wonderful. And Peter, if I remember correctly, Shea didn't make wines with whole cluster for quite some time and then began to. Are you guys still using whole cluster, or is that part of your winemaking?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think it used to be a big part of what we did, but and even now I wouldn't describe it as necessarily a big part. I sort of crunched the numbers on what we did with a lot of different things after each vintage, and there were a couple of years where we were like, okay, yeah, let's really push it with whole cluster this year, and then realized we moved from, like, if you look at the totality of the vintage, from like 11% whole cluster, like 13% whole cluster. It was like, wow, that really didn't we didn't do as much as I thought. It's also, agreeing with what other people have said, that it can be very site specific. We found certain blocks in our vineyard respond really well to it, but we really like some of the factors of whole cluster, but it is another thing. You have to keep it in balance with the rest of the wine. And I know in our site, especially, we get a lot of skin tannin. We get a lot of, things where whole cluster isn't necessarily going to be beneficial and it can overwhelm the wine. You don't want that it can bring a lot of tannin there. That's the thing we especially worry about with it.
Completely. That's awesome. Well, and I think in making these wines too, especially for the wine auction, I'm curious, are you guys and gals, are you looking for, something more ageable or something more approachable? I always find this to be, one of my most difficult dilemmas, especially wines that are going into wholesale and distribution or club. But I'm curious to see if you guys are kind of going one way or the other with your auction lots. Something like you encourage somebody to keep it in bottle a while, or you encourage them to drink pretty quickly?
And the answer is yes.
Oh, both. Fantastic.
Yeah, and you have to make a wine that's, I think, enjoyable now, but almost really all the top quality Oregon Pinots, they're going to be probably at their peak, or better in 3 to 5 years, I think. But I don't think you want to make a wine that's undrinkable upon release, or so tannic or so acidic. So yeah, finding that balance where, it's also fun to hold on to it for 10, 15 years and watch it evolve. So
Right.
For the profile of wine that I try to do, I tend to agree with Bryan on that. I think you can produce wines that are structured properly, that they drink well early and age fairly well for quite a while. So so I don't think they're necessarily, to me, they're not mutually exclusive, but I do want to make wines that benefit from that 3 to 5 year, because that's what the good ones do, at least. Yeah.
Right. Fantastic.
It's definitely a fine line. So I think it's that happy balance that these guys are talking about. And I would say it's maybe skewed a little bit towards wanting to make sure this wine can age than being perfectly ready to go. And I think everyone who's tasting these wines understands these were bottled, some of them just recently. Ours was bottled in September, but yeah, it's that fine line. You got to be balancing and make sure you see the big picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just like all of our wines, there's no intention at the outset to make this wine, right? So we have a number of different levels of wines that we make. I know you all do. And we farm to make the very best wine. We pick to make the very best wine. We vinify to make the very best wine, and then barrel age that way. And then once they're all in barrel, it's really selecting things that go into the Willamette Valley versus into the L'Ensemble or the single vineyard blends or this bottling, right? And with this, we get the advantage of just picking one barrel, which I guess is also a disadvantage. It's just a single barrel. I firmly believe that the more components you're adding in, the more interesting and complex the wine is going to be. So you really need to find that barrel that people can taste, right, for an event and feel really excited about, because either they see the potential or it's really approachable. But if people are putting this kind of money and energy behind it, you want it to be around for a long time too. I mean, I think good Oregon wine should be able to age now for 20 years without a problem. So that's what we're hoping to make. I think everyone.
Wonderful, especially with the vintage like this, like classic, more acid driven, more ethereal. I think it has all the givings for that. But Peter, how about you? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. We're not determining that what goes into our blend until when it's in barrel, and exactly what Tracy was saying. We're trying to make the best wine that we can all the way through. And then when it comes time to deciding, for us, it's coming from multiple barrels that we're putting together into this blend. And at that point, we do put some thought into, is this one going to take too long to open if you use this combination versus this combination? I think all of them will age beautifully. It's just a question of, things like wood tannins can really take a while to open up early on. So we might not go for something that's going to, really need a lot of time at the beginning. So we want something that's both ready now and will be great later. So.
Fantastic. Great. Now, these are all really interesting things. I think I learned more about winemakers and all the things they do on these sessions than I would normally. And Tracy, something you said earlier, you may have even said it when we're talking together before, but vintages like 2019, I know that we had a few rain episodes that we had to kind of hopscotch through, and you talked about resiliency, and your vineyard at Bishop Creek, you said, is quite resilient. I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that. And I think it opens up that conversation for the group as well. Like young vine or old vine. I always waver back and forth, and I think there's a lot of magic with both having an old vine and a young vine. But resiliency is something that really stuck out to me, Tracy, and it'd be nice to hear what you have to say in the group.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have an interesting relationship with young vine, old vine, because I've had great wines from both and made what I think are great wines from both. But, working with that old school Burgundian, I bring a vineyard to him that's 30 years old and he's like, just a child. So, it reveals some perspective. But Bishop Creek was planted in the late 1980s, not by us, but we purchased it in 2014 and have farmed it ever since. And having those older vines, we also work with Hyland, from the 70s. And they're own rooted as well. So there's no graft union, which I think is something that we can't always have, right? Phylloxera is absolutely a real threat. We don't have it out of Bishop Creek. We've been really lucky, but it is present in the valley for sure. And people have to remove vineyards for it. So I always hate to talk about own rooted as better than, but I certainly feel like I see resiliency from older vines and from old-rooted vines that have that straight pathway from the ground up to the fruit. And so when we have challenging weather events, whether it's, you know, super cold, frost, heat spikes, right, in the summer, rain at harvest, those older vines tend to just weather it a little bit better. I think that they have a better trunk, you know, the flow of water and or lack of water seems to be managed better. The canopies seem to be more balanced. We do very little fruit thinning. We do very little leaf pulling. The vines seem to have figured out what to do in that soil. And they've seen, you know, yes, we have kind of a new normal in Oregon, but these vines have seen it all, right? They've seen super hot weather. They've seen super cold weather. They've seen a lot of rain. And so they know what to do. And I think that resiliency is really powerful in a challenging climate as Oregon can be in a lot of years.
Wonderful. What do other winemakers think about that?
Yep.
Same.
I do have with the Austins, it's pretty special because they've established most of their vineyards, but they did purchase one vineyard that was planted about 20 years ago. So it's not super old, but you do get to see some pretty different intrinsic qualities from the younger and the older wines. And both I think are good. I think the young wines coming off of young vines, I should say, the wines coming off of young vines can be really pretty rambunctious and pretty fruity and floral and really a little bit weird at times, kind of like a teenager, if you will, but in such an interesting, complex way. And then I think obviously, like Tracy said, definitely the older vines can weather some of these weather patterns that we have in Oregon in September, October, a little better, heat spikes. And clearly with dry farming here, most of us are dry farmed, you know, the roots have really dug deep in some different layers. And so in general, I think that really helps with the complexity. And but yeah, I think they both have beautiful different components to them, just in a different way.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think one of the nice things about in some cases vineyards are a little on the younger side is that we changed the way we plant as far as density and some of the selections that we make and learning sites a little bit better. So the old vine stuff can be, and I work with a bit here and there, has a characteristic to it that can't quite be found in younger vineyards, but younger vineyards are some cases the product of us knowing our terroir, increasingly sometimes.
And that character, Drew, is it textural? I mean, is it like aromatic? I mean, what do you think it is that old vines give you?
To me, there's a weightlessness, there's a lift, there's kind of a glide, I think pretty spatially and sort of movement wise about wine. So that's probably why I'll use some of the metaphors I'm using, but there's a lift and a weightlessness and an aromatic quality that is it's hard to put your finger on, but it's there. And younger vines don't quite have the same exact, just because own roots, especially if it's own rooted vines don't quite grow the same as their vigor is different and all of that. So I think there is that lightness, and it's kind of, and as older, as very old vineyards in the Willamette Valley, as some of them begin to collapse to phylloxera, it's definitely a little on the sad side, because what brought me to Oregon, I moved here almost 24 years ago to make wine, and some of that profile that, for those that are old like me, came here for, those wines are getting a little rarer and rarer over time, which is a little bit of a shame.
No doubt.
Yeah, I think at Hyland, we're coming on this is our 50th anniversary of the vineyard, and there are some real, gnarly old vines that are from our original plantings. There are some years where they get a little cranky and go up and down, but man, when they're right, there's just nothing better than, I think, the depth and complexity that the old vines give you when you're tasting through the cellar, and different blocks of our Corey clone from different vintage, different years being planted. When the original plantings are right, there's something about it, and it's not indescribable, but it's more like a feeling. You can see it when you pour it for somebody and they just go, "Ooh, wow!" Like it just like overtakes your body. And I don't know. Drew had some really nice words to describe it, but there's a feeling and a depth that there's just a little bit more there that's a little bit more that's hiding. That's that it just gives you so much more. I don't know. It's hard to describe, but it's definitely there.
Wonderful. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, I've been covered, but yeah, the depth and complexity that you get with older vines is definitely apparent there. Younger vines, just a little more sort of linear fruit profile and texture to it and everything. And we've replanted our vineyard in some areas twice now, and this is going to be our 30th harvest will be this year. Yeah, unfortunately, none of the original vines are there anymore, but our vines age now, are range from 25 years now to fourth leaf fruit. And so there's this broad spectrum there. They've all got something different to offer. I mean, maybe you could say that the young vine fruit, because it is so, pretty and so fruit forward, that it is, expresses itself a little better in wines that are drinkable younger. But definitely that depth and complexity you get with older vines is irreplaceable.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough watching an old vineyard, decline or, change to virus or phylloxera. And, I think it's always a tough decision to make to, start replanting and start incrementally removing. Because I mean, the sooner you plant a young vine, the sooner it'll be an old vine. I think those questions are always really tough. I always struggle with those. But yeah, Julia, I know you probably have a couple questions burning. I've got a list, but I love your questions too.
I do. I had a couple of questions related to old vines that I think were covered really beautifully just now, but I am also curious, people talk about the 2019 vintage as being such an old school Oregon vintage, and I'd love to know for each of the panelists, what was your first vintage in the Willamette Valley like? And does 2019 remind you of any vintages in your past?
I'll start. I don't like to talk about my first vintage. I like to talk about my first two vintages. So my first vintage in the Willamette Valley was 2006. And that was a warm year. It was a really, I would say, an easy year. The fruit was beautiful. We could take our time picking whatever we wanted to, put the wine in a barrel and forget about it, bring it out of barrel in August and bottle it. And then 2007 happened and it rained a little bit in 2007. And wow, it'd be like come in December, we actually had to do some work in the cellar and maybe rack some barrels and, and deal with a few other miscellaneous things. So, and right there, it taught me what's great about Oregon is that the sixes were incredible. They were showy and opulent and round. But man, the sevens, we worked really hard on the sevens to get the ripeness we wanted, put the wines together. And yeah, the first couple of years, they were a little rough around the edges, but man, some of the sevens now, when you taste them, they're still showing incredible. Still have beautiful acidity, and just have to have a real yin and yang of those two vintages back to back were really fun.
Yeah, for those of you on the call, if you have not had any 2007s from the Willamette Valley recently, I highly recommend trying to remedy that. It's a vintage that I always remember because I was first getting interested in wine and reading Wine Spectator, and I saw all these comments about how rough the 2007 vintage was. And then when I moved out here in 2017, I was tasting some 2007s and just absolutely blown away, and they've really stood the test of time. So it's kind of a cool thing to always keep in mind, is that sometimes these vintages take a little bit longer to unfurl, and then they're just incredible. But I'd love to know what everybody else thinks.
Well, I'm the same as Bryan with an I. And Drew, you're part of the reason I got in this industry, so I'm going to cut you off. Yes. It's your fault. But Bryan with an I, 06, 07 was kind of my start in the Valley, and I actually made some wine under our own label in 2007. What a great vintage to start. But like you said, phenomenal right now. And I think some of those vintages, 7, 13, 19, that have some fairly significant rains in September, October, sometimes early on, maybe the media says it's all lost, but it's some of, I think, the best vintages we've had for long-term aging because the chemistries are better. And we know how to deal with that here in Oregon. That's the one thing people, it always rains in Oregon. Well, yeah, sometimes, but we know how to deal with these up and down vintages from whatever it may be with heat or rain. And so to me, I like a 19 kind of similar to 7 and 13, just real elegant, moderate alcohols, great acidity, should age really well.
Yeah, my first vintage was, I'm old. My first vintage was 1998 in the Willamette Valley. So 1998 was a pretty classic vintage, low yield concentration, but a cool finish and to the vintage, and came in with some of those sort of perfect chemistries that you think of vintages like 2008, 2012, 2018, kind of that were comparatively easy, basically. So that was an interesting start, but it was an easy start. I get the ease in.
Go for it, Peter.
So yeah, having grown up here in Oregon and my family's been doing this for a long time. So I'll just say my first vintage though was when I was actually, productive enough to be considered a harvest intern, not like someone who was having to be kept track of in the winery. So that for me, that was 2012. And, since then, outside of 13 and a little bit in 17, we haven't had a vintage that was quite like 19. And both of those are really different as well. So 19 is pretty unique for me because the rest of the years that I've been here doing this have all been really warm and dry. And I think part of what makes 19 so unique is that it went so late, it got much cooler, and Ian keeps referring to the vintage as ethereal. And I think that's a really great descriptor. It's for people who have gotten to know Oregon in the last, call it 10 years, this is going to be a very, this is the closest thing to a classical Oregon vintage that I think you can find in that time period. The wines are just fantastic in the expression of really pretty red fruit and everything, because we didn't get, we got a long hang time. We got the fruit got ripe, but without getting into that really big and opulent kind of style. So yeah, for me, it's a unique vintage.
Yeah, I agree. 2009 was my first vintage in the Valley. I'm not that young. I just did some other things before I got into wine. But, I was an intern in the beginning, and I think 11 was my first full-time vintage. And although 19 is not really like 11 was very cool and very late. And when I was here with the 11 vintage, people were selling the 08s and like hiding the 7s, right? It was like the 7s got panned, the 8s were just this beautiful, perfect vintage. So everyone kind of moved them out in the market and squirreled away their 7s. And so we were able to buy 7s almost everywhere and have been drinking those now for the last maybe 3 years. And they are just stunning. And the 11s are starting to do that. And I think what I've seen, I'd be curious to know from more veterans of the industry that we have on the call, the 19s, I was, to be honest, a little bit worried about. It was the first year that I was in charge of a cooler, wetter year and didn't really know what to make of these wines in the beginning. But the longer they've been in bottle, we bottled in February, the more they've sort of fattened up, become more round, gained weight, gained flesh, gained aromatic complexity. And it makes me excited to think that what we're holding on to now is another 7 and 11, those wines that can just age endlessly, right? And just kind of get better and better in bottle. It's cool. It's cool to see.
Great point. Well, I keep hearing too, I mean, I know we've got some people that have been here a while and, some, gosh, like 07, 06, 1998. What brought each one of you to Oregon? Like, what were you guys doing before you made wine? I'm really curious. I don't know. I don't think I know this about any of you. I maybe have a sense, Peter, of you, but I'm just guessing. But I'm curious to see what brought you guys out here.
Well, mine's kind of boring, and then I've never done anything else. So I went off to college to study chemical engineering, and then at UC Davis, and then worked a harvest in 1993 when I was 18 in the Central Valley in California, where I'm from, and switched my major, and then moved to Oregon. I fell for Oregon Pinots when I was 20, in a student tasting. I'm in my little tasting room office right now, and I have the tasting notes that changed my direction in my life on the shelf behind me. and they were 91, 92, and 93 Willamette Valley Pinot Noirs, and I went, I got to check that out. One road trip turned into 2 or 3, and then I started looking for work and been here ever since.
Super cool.
What's in the tasting notes? Like, do you remember any of them?
Yeah, I have them. Yeah, they're very enthusiastic. Lots of exclamation points and circles. And I mean, I was pretty new to wine tasting. I didn't grow up in a wine family, but the enthusiasm was not visible in my prior notes. I think before that there were multiple tastings, and I was writing down notes and things I liked, and this one was like just understanding the lightness and elegance, but then the power that the Pinot Noir can combine those two things was initially sort of confusing and confounding, and then became a. But yeah, they were wines like the original Arterberry label and Veritas and Chateau Benoit and some stuff that isn't around, and then a few like Alcove and Ponzi and things that still had Newts and Erath when that was still a thing. It's kind of fun to look back in the time capsule.
Hey, Drew, I have my, so I grew up working in restaurants and food. And then I knew at some point I wanted to be, I wanted to be on the business side of food and wine, but I really didn't know where. And so I worked in a wine shop in Berkeley called Cellars for about a year. And I still have my tasting notes from there. We used to taste with the suppliers that come in and show their wines. And it's fun to look back now because I still, I started at Shea and I tasted the 2000 vintage Shea 3 vintage Pinot Noir. And I tasted all these wines through that Tom Elliott had, was showing us. And so it's really fun to go back and look at those notes and, and the relationships that I have now with the people and, that I got to work at some of these wineries and the wines I tasted. And then I had for me, the aha moment when I decided to study at Fresno State, when I was talking to a friend who was going there, and he said, what's your, what are you doing today? Oh, I've got a viticulture final. Like, what do you have to do for your final? It's like, I got to go out to the vineyard and prune a bunch of vines. And that was me when I said, that's what I want to do. So yeah, I moved to Fresno and studied winemaking and viticulture at Fresno State. And then when I finished, I knew I really wanted cool climate. And I really wanted to be in a small industry. And I had gone to University of Oregon my first round of college. So I knew I loved Oregon. I knew I loved the Willamette Valley. So it was a pretty easy decision to make for me. The Willamette Valley was where I wanted to live and make wine. So pretty exciting.
Yeah, I always loved wine. I didn't have it growing up, but when I got to college and everyone was drinking, cheap beer, I would be like bringing the Yellowtail Magnum and felt super fancy. And luckily I had godparents down here in Portland who were around sort of at the beginning of the industry and huge supporters. And so they had this beautiful cellar, a lot of old world wines, but also, like Adelsheim, Elizabeth Reserve, going back to the origins of that wine. And I would come down and they would educate me on wines and open old world wines and these beautiful older Oregon wines. And I just fell in love with the stories they had around them and how it brought food together with this like romantic history of the time they had it, right? And what that vineyard was doing, what was happening in that time capsule. But I ended up getting a master's in global health and thought I was going to go down sort of that public servant route, and ended up getting a little bit disenchanted with nonprofits, deciding to come work at Harvest in 2009 and just completely caught the bug. Started traveling and here I am. So
instead of keeping people healthy, you decided to make them happy.
Exactly. It's still kind of nonprofit work, the wine industry, but yeah, it's very different.
That's awesome.
Yeah, for me, my parents brought me here because I grew up here. I was born here. So I was born in Salem, West Salem, down South Eola, Amity. So I was always around grapes and definitely, saw it around in a growing industry when I was growing up, but never really thought of it as a profession. With the Austins from Rain Dance and Chehalis Mountains, they obviously grew up here too and have been around the wine scene and got to watch it grow until they started, doing their own label and vineyard. So, but for me personally, I got into wine through culinary school. So I'd actually originally been at Oregon State for engineering and Air Force ROTC, but switched over to culinary school after I got a little bit too tall. And so switched over to that, and first term was able to take a food and wine pairing class and just loved everything about it. So for 2 years in culinary school, was able to take as many classes as possible there and from some other, community colleges like Chemeketa and just learn a lot about just the sensory and just about wines of the world and the history of wine. And then through some encouragement from some guy below me here, and a few other people, when I was working at a winery, a tasting room, as well as working at the Joel Palmer House over here with wild mushrooms and truffles, and getting to try some of the best Oregon Pinot Noirs around, because all the winemakers would come and leave that much in the bottom of 12 different bottles they'd bring on the table. And the owner would be great with me to try them. So really fortunate that culinary school kind of got me into it. And then I did go back to Oregon State to finish up my my winemaking degree there. I don't give Bryan or Irvine too much crap, but go Beavers. So that was how I got into it, though, through food.
Not everyone's perfect, Bryan. Sorry, but
Bryan with an eye.
How about you, Peter?
So yeah, I mean, having grown up around this quite a bit, I started off, as a teenager coming into clean barrels during racking and stuff like that, which inspired me to, when I was going off to school, decide I want to do anything but get into winemaking. And so I wasn't until I was graduating from college, also Go Ducks. Sorry, Bryan. But when I was coming back from school, I decided I would come in and be a harvest intern just for that season, and then probably go do something else. And I've since heard somebody else who grew up in a winemaking family say that once you get into the family business, there's no getting out. Which no one told me that before. I'm only going to work one vintage. So here I've been for 10 years now. So. And enjoying it a lot. So,
well, I think this valley is extremely lucky to have all these individuals here who contribute in so many different ways and are always available for any question that comes their way, and for donating these auction lots that you put your entire life into, and to make them unique and enjoyable. I think it's super cool. Well, Julia, I don't know. Are there any other questions the panelists have come up with or that you'd like to ask?
No, I think that's it for our questions from the Q&A. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for your time today. It's just amazing getting to pick everyone's brains about these beautiful and incredibly unique wines. Like Ian said, we're super grateful that everyone takes the time and puts in the resources into doing this. And so, Ian, do you want to close it out, or should I do that?
I can't wait. I can't wait to try your wines next week, guys. And thanks for spreading the good word and supporting this incredible auction for all that it does.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
For those joining us next week, we'll see you August 5th, virtually or in person. And for everyone else, I just dropped the preview week schedule in the chat if you want to join us for any other sessions this week. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you August 5th.
See you guys.
All right.